In the mansion where the glow of the chandeliers hid the cracks of the human heart, there was an invisible woman. The maid walked the halls with light steps, carrying the pain she could not reveal. Every harsh order from her mistress, every cold silence from her master, every look of contempt pushed her deeper into a world where crying was forbidden. So she wept silently, holding back tears no one had ever seen. But fate, patient and relentless, was preparing something no one could have imagined. For the same woman who had been treated as a shadow would be placed before everyone in the center of the light, and the revelation would not only change her life, but would turn the mansion itself upside down. On a sultry afternoon, when the tension in the house seemed unbearable, an unexpected incident once again exposed the young woman's humiliation to everyone. She endured it without reacting, merely lowering her eyes, allowing tears to fall as she sat alone in the back room. But what no one knew was that at that very moment, fate was already moving its devices. Hidden secrets, silent evidence, and watchful eyes were beginning to align to reveal a truth no one suspected. What was about to happen would transform the humiliated maid into the protagonist of a twist that would shock the entire mansion, and finally make karma do its job. If this story has moved you so far, leave a like and subscribe to follow the next chapters. The mansion stood amidst one of the most upscale neighborhoods in the United States, like a temple dedicated to appearances. Its iron gates opened only to imported cars and guests with important surnames, and the marble corridors gleamed as if every reflection were part of a spectacle. But amidst the glittering chandeliers and gala dinners, there was someone who never took part in this stage. The young blonde maid with discreet eyes and a barely audible voice. For her, each day was a silent battle, where victory lay only in resistance. Humiliated by harsh orders, scorned by haughty looks, she learned early on that there was no room for tears in public. She wept only in silence, hidden in a narrow room at the back of the house where no one cared to look. Her employer, the absolute mistress of the mansion, treated her like a shadow. All it took was a single detail out of place, a slightly misaligned glass, a poorly folded napkin, and her sharp words would come with the precision of razors. "You never learn, do you? People like you are good for nothing more." Her employer's friends laughed knowingly, as if the humiliation were part of the entertainment. The young woman endured it, swallowed the lump in her throat, and returned to work, sustained only by the hope that one day fate would make her seen not as an object, but as a person. The millionaire, for his part, kept his distance. He was immersed in reports, meetings, and business dealings that multiplied his fortune. He cared little about what was happening in the hallways of his own home. When he passed the maid, he rarely noticed her, and when he did, it was only as part of the living furniture that made the house function. But behind his coldness lay gaps that even he didn't recognize, glances that were too fleeting, silences that weighed more heavily than they should. He didn't know it yet, but these details would become abysses. The only one who seemed to see her was the couple's son. The child, alone in the cold luxury, sought in her a presence he couldn't find in his parents. The innocent smile that appeared when the maid tidied his toys or offered him a hidden glass of juice was silent proof that there was something there no one could steal: humanity. This connection, so pure, would soon become a source of jealousy for the mistress, who couldn't bear to see her son's affections turn to someone she despised. Thus, amidst ostentatious dinners, false laughter, and cruel orders, the young woman wept in silence, believing the world had decided that this was her place. Invisible, demeaned, voiceless. Little did she know that fate itself, patient and relentless, was already devising a plan to transform her hidden tears into strength, and her humiliation into a stage for a truth no one could silence. What was to come would not only be a change in her life, but an earthquake that would shake the foundations of that mansion built on lies and vanity. Mornings at the mansion began as sacred rituals. The breakfast table was set like a magazine display: white china, silver cutlery, exotic flower arrangements, and plates arranged at perfect angles. The waitress circulated silently, adjusting napkins, filling glasses, ensuring nothing detracted from the spectacle. But for her mistress, there was always a flaw to point out. One day it was a napkin folded with a crooked corner. The next, the tablecloth wouldn't fall at the proper time. No detail escaped her cruel need to demean. "You ruin even simple things," she said in front. Of everyone one morning when her closest friends were present. The echoing laughter seemed to sharpen the young woman's pain even further as she swallowed her tears and continued on, head bowed. The millionaire, sitting at the head of the table, leafed through the newspaper without looking up. His indifference was more painful than his wife's insults because it confirmed that to him she was nothing more than air. His son, small and attentive, watched in silence. He didn't understand the weight of her words, but he felt the injustice. When his mother demanded that he refuse the bread served by the maid, the boy simply lowered his head, harboring in his heart a revolt he couldn't yet name. Another day, during a more formal lunch, the boss took advantage of the presence of guests to further humiliate her. She deliberately spilled wine on the tablecloth and, in a loud voice, said, "Just look, even training a simple employee requires the patience of a saint. Imagine entrusting someone with something truly important." The laughter echoed. The maid, kneeling down cleaning the tablecloth, felt each look like a blade. But in her eyes, despite the fear, there was also a gleam of silent resistance, as if she knew she wouldn't be easily broken. The millionaire once again fell silent. He pretended not to see his wife pushing the young woman to the brink of ridicule, but his hand gripped the edge of the table tightly, betraying a pent-up fury. He still didn't dare act, but something inside him was beginning to stir. The truth is, his silence wasn't one of agreement, but of cowardice, and that cowardice, day after day, turned into a burden. The humiliations didn't stop within the house. The mistress made a point of spreading them like funny stories at social gatherings. She told friends and acquaintances how the naive maid made ridiculous mistakes, and the rumors spread throughout the city like poisonous rumors. For the maid, going out into the streets meant feeling suspicious looks, hearing muffled laughter, carrying the burden of a destroyed reputation without defense. Still, she didn't abandon her work. She remained steadfast, as if each silent tear were a brick building a wall against cruelty. The boy increasingly sought her company. He sat in the pantry while she washed dishes, followed her into the garden as she raked leaves, laughed when she improvised repairs to broken toys. Small gestures that her mistress interpreted as an affront were, in fact, just genuine love. But this innocent affection gradually blossomed into a spark. Her mistress couldn't bear to share even her son's affection, and each time they came into contact with each other, her resentment toward the young woman grew. The millionaire, caught between appearances and social obligations, remained silent, but the world was already beginning to demand his silence. Because the boy looked to the maid as a safe haven, the employer fueled her anger with more humiliation, and the young woman continued to cry in silence, ever closer to the moment when fate would turn its course. As the weeks passed, the boy grew closer and closer to the maid, as if he'd found in her a piece of home that didn't exist in the cold luxury of the mansion. It was in small gestures that this bond grew stronger. While she was cleaning the garden, he would emerge with his shoes still untied, asking for help. The young woman would smile and bend down to retie the laces, patiently teaching him the knot that wouldn't come undone easily. The boy, proud, would repeat the gesture minutes later, only to elicit a simple but genuine compliment from her. "See? Now you can do it yourself." On afternoons when his mistress left for social engagements, the boy would run to the pantry and ask to join her in the chores. He would sit at the counter while she cooked, asking questions about everything and laughing at the stories she made up to distract him. Sometimes he would hand her colorful drawings with scribbled hearts and a woman in an apron. "It's you," he would say with the innocence of someone unashamed of love. She kept these little treasures folded in her apron pocket, reminders that, even amidst the contempt, there was someone who truly saw her. The millionaire, even though he tried to maintain a distant demeanor, noticed his son was different, happier, less aloof, more willing to smile. He watched him from afar with contained curiosity and silently acknowledged that the young woman's presence somehow filled a void neither he nor his wife could grasp. He never commented aloud, but that childish affection was beginning to feel like an indictment of his own coldness. The mistress, on the other hand, burned with rage. Every time she saw her son clinging to the maid's skirt, she felt as if an invisible crown had been ripped from her head. For her, the child was supposed to admire her, obey her, and love her without reservation. The mere fact that he sought solace in another person was seen as a personal affront. Jealousy mingled with contempt, turning into silent fury, and this fury would soon turn to action. One night, during a family dinner, the boy refused the soup his mother served. He sulked, turned his face away, and suddenly looked at the maid as if begging for help. She cautiously picked up the spoon and offered the food. The boy accepted immediately, flashing a smile his wife hadn't seen in weeks. The entire room froze. The millionaire looked up from his plate and for a moment seemed to share her embarrassment. His mistress gritted her teeth, forced a laugh and tried to hide her tension, but inside she was burning. After the guests left, she vented her anger at her husband. "This is unacceptable. This woman is stealing our son's affection. This is dangerous, don't you see?" He, tired of empty arguments, responded only with silence. But this silence, for once, wasn't complacency. It was uncomfortable. The maid, aware of the increasingly hostile atmosphere, tried to distance herself from the boy. She avoided paying attention to him in public, left him in the care of the housekeeper, and refused the drawings he offered. But the child persisted. He searched for her in the hallways, called out to her when he woke from nightmares, and cried when she couldn't be found. And with each tear she shed, the mistress fueled her resentment. This bond, innocent and pure, was what sustained the young woman through her days of pain. But it would also be the fuse that would light the explosion. The wife no longer wanted to simply humiliate the maid. Now she wanted to destroy her completely. And the plan began to take shape in the shadows, like a trap that would soon close before everyone's eyes. The mansion was preparing for a night of ostentation. It was the most anticipated event of the season, a lavish party where businessmen, socialites, and politicians would parade their finest attire beneath crystal chandeliers. The mistress attended to every detail as if she were staging a theatrical performance, and in a way she was. The ballroom was decorated with imported flowers, the banquet table stretched like a sea of gold and silver, and the waiters lined up waiting for the signal to serve expensive wines. For her, it wasn't just about impressing her guests, but about using that evening as a stage to reinforce her absolute power. The maid moved around silently, adjusting glasses, checking napkins, and serving dishes. She wore a simple uniform, but there was a serenity about her that clashed with the surroundings. She tried to be invisible, but it was impossible not to notice the dignity she carried, even in her most banal gestures. The boy, seated next to his father at the long table, constantly sought her eyes, smiling whenever she approached. This detail did not escape her employer, who had already planned how she would turn the evening into yet another weapon against the young woman. As the music softened and conversation settled, the mistress raised her champagne flute and tapped it lightly with her spoon, drawing everyone's attention. The room fell silent. "Dear friends," he began, his voice sweet and laced with venom, "in this house, we have always valued trust. But lately, small incidents have tested our patience." He paused, letting the suspense hang in the air. Eyes began to shift toward the waitress, who was now holding a tray of wine. With a smile that hid her cruelty, the mistress continued, "Just imagine finding glasses out of place, poorly ironed tablecloths, and even belongings that seemed to mysteriously shift." The guests laughed, some uncomfortably, others maliciously. The waitress felt her face heat up, but she maintained her composure. She placed the tray on the table with steady hands, even though she was trembling inside. The millionaire, sitting at the head of the table, watched in silence. His eyes roamed the room and landed on his wife, then on the maid. He said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw revealed that the sight bothered him more than he let on. The boy, restless, looked at his mother and then at the maid, clearly uncomfortable. The boss, noticing the attention she had garnered, decided to step forward. Of course it could just be carelessness, she said, feigning innocence, but we all know that sometimes unprepared people can't adapt to an environment like this. There was more laughter. The young woman lowered her eyes, hiding the tears that threatened to escape. The humiliation was complete, but while everyone applauded the hostess's skill in turning even insults into jokes, the mansion's cameras recorded every detail: the tone of voice, the looks of contempt, the young woman's pained expression. Silent witnesses who soon would be summoned by fate to rewrite that history. The party continued, but something had changed. The millionaire couldn't smile again. His son silently refused dessert. And the maid, though firm, carried a weight on her chest that no hidden tears could alleviate. The employer believed she had won once again, but she didn't know that the stage she had set for her humiliation would soon be the same one that would reveal her downfall. The next morning dawned with a different kind of silence, the kind that seems rehearsed before tragedy strikes. The mistress strode through the closet like someone storming a stage and suddenly let out a scream that echoed through the hallways. The most valuable jewel had disappeared. Within seconds, the entire house was summoned to the main hall, and the maid arrived last, breathing shallowly, her hands still wet from the pantry sink. The clock, the glow of the chandeliers, the shuffling steps, everything conspired to transform the moment into a spectacle. The mistress emerged, her face just the right amount pale, tears carefully held back, and spoke with the gravity of an actress. "Someone betrayed our trust." The word trust there felt like a sentence. The housekeeper positioned herself discreetly near the young woman, as if trying to hold on to a wing before a gale. The millionaire, seated, maintained a stony silence. Beside him, his son watched with the eyes of someone who senses an approaching earthquake. When the mistress described the jewel taken from the safe and insinuated that someone with extensive access to the house might have given in to temptation, eyes turned like arrows toward the maid. She didn't flinch. She simply clutched the tray to her chest, as if a piece of metal could keep her heart from pounding. The search began. Not in the closet, not in the safe, not in the corners where it would make sense, but in the employee's small world. The narrow closet, the drawer with 2 uniforms, the bag with documents folded in 4, the old photo holding the smile of a family that wasn't there. Nothing. The security chief cleared his throat, disconcerted, and the boss decided to follow leads. Minutes later, she reappeared with the jewel in her hands, triumphant, announcing that she had found it hidden among boxes of groceries in the pantry. The word hidden echoed, and the echo turned into judgment. The waitress opened her mouth, but her voice seemed to have remained outside with the morning. "I never touched that," he managed, his eyes brimming with tears, apologizing for nothing. His mistress smiled with the mercy of someone who knows how to hurt. "The house is big, dear. So is the mistake." He turned to the guests still milling about from the previous night's event and offered them the closing scene. The virtuous hostess, who for the sake of others' reputation preferred to resolve things internally. The millionaire rose half a step as if to say something. The mask pulled him back to his chair. His son then crossed the room and clung to the maid's waist with the urgency of someone saving what they love. "She didn't do anything," he said, and the short sentence rang truer than the entire marble speech. There was a moment when the house seemed to hold its breath. The security chief looked away. The housekeeper clenched her fingers on the dishcloth to keep from trembling. 2 waiters looked at each other, complicit in an uneasy feeling they couldn't quite name. The boss, seeing the scene slipping away, raised her voice and demanded measures. She didn't shout. There was no need. The order came politely, that the employee be removed from the prime areas, that her schedule be re-evaluated, that the team review protocols. The euphemism was just a veneer on the same old humiliation. The maid kept her jaw set. Every fiber of her body begged to run. Her feet agreed to stay. She didn't beg, didn't negotiate innocence. Innocence doesn't need a price. As the housekeeper passed her, she discreetly brushed the edge of her hand, a minimal gesture of shelter in enemy territory. At the top of the stairs, a red camera blinked its routine lights as if yawning. Fate, which knows corridors better than their owners, silently recorded the calculated choreography, the precise timing of the find, the route chosen for the performance, the intervals that didn't match the story told. The boss ended the meeting with a shopfront smile, promising to resolve everything without scandal. The millionaire responded with a nod that fooled no one. The boy, still clinging to his apron, was slowly pulled away by the housekeeper, and in his eyes there was a courage. Adults forget to believe what they saw, not what they were told to believe. The young woman took a deep breath, once, twice, and returned to her work, like someone returning to the battlefield after the first shot. As she cleared the glasses from the table, her hand trembled only until it touched the glass. Then it steadied. Dignity is the gesture that resists when the name tries to be pushed to the ground. At the back of the house, in the hallway connecting the pantry to the kitchen, she paused. For a second before the shelf where what she had never touched had been found. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood and closed his eyes. He hadn't asked for life to be easy. He'd only asked for the truth to have a breath. Outside, the mourning was continuing. Inside, the wheels were turning, the pressure to confess, the rumors ready to leave the mansion, the first crack in the silence of the man who, though silent, was beginning, finally, to doubt the story handed to him on a platter. They led her into the office as if she were a defendant, walking down a courtroom hallway. The door closed with a soft click that seemed louder than any scream. On the table, the jewel rested like evidence placed on an altar, and beside it was a piece of paper already printed, with empty lines awaiting a signature they treated as destiny. The mistress smiled with a sweetness that tasted like a blade and spoke softly, so her words would sink in without making a sound. Spare the house. Confess. The housekeeper, summoned as a witness, kept her hands clasped to hide her trembling. The security chief cleared his throat twice before staring at the wall. The millionaire stood in the back, arms crossed, the pose of someone dominating the scene. Inside, an invisible thread was beginning to pull him back to the truth. The young woman took a deep breath, as if learning to use her lungs again, and said no. She didn't raise her voice, didn't improvise, just kept repeating, ever more firmly, that she hadn't touched the jewel. Her employer persisted with questions that sought no answer, only weariness, schedules, routes, gestures. When she realized her refusal wouldn't break, she slid the paper closer and pointed her pen. Sign and everything will be resolved. The word everything was an abyss. The maid stared at her for 3 long seconds and instead of falling, took a step back. In the retreat, her childhood fit, her mother's face in her memories, the narrow room in the boarding house, the boy who had embraced her in the living room. I won't write lies with my hand, she said. The sentence was small, but it had the density of a rock. The interrogation turned into a round. They doubled questions, twisted schedules, invented memory lapses. With each turn of the screw, she simply blinked more slowly to keep the tears from falling in front of those who wanted to see her collapse. She cried afterwards, alone, leaning over the narrow bed in the servants' quarters, muffling the sound in her pillow so no one would collect her tears as evidence. On the dresser, the housekeeper had left a manila envelope with a few bills and a 3-word note. I saw you. That was enough to keep the pain from devouring her courage. That night, she was assigned to a meaningless shift in the pantry, as if more work rewrote truths. As she scrubbed a glass that already gleamed, she heard her boss's voice drifting down the hallway, forging compassion for 2 friends on the phone. I don't want the police, poor thing. They're people who don't know their way around. Her heart wanted to run, but her feet planted themselves on the marble floor like roots. Dignity, she learned there, was remaining whole where they wanted to see her broken. The son appeared at the door secretly, with the medal of courage attached to a string. He took 1 step, then another, and held out the small award as if handing over a shield. The housekeeper pulled him back before her mistress appeared, but the gesture lingered in the air. Minutes later, the millionaire passed by, stopped for no apparent reason, and his gaze met hers in a spot in the hallway where no one usually sees each other. He didn't speak, but something in him, for the first time, seemed to apologize. When the house fell asleep, the security chief sought out his boss. His voice came low, with the weight of someone who'd carried too much. The records have gaps. They don't add up with the narrative. The millionaire nodded. Without showing surprise, he laid his hand on the table, lightly touched the jewel that no longer meant anything to him, and simply said, "Tomorrow, everything." That word, in that tone, sounded like a nail driven into the wood of the farce. In the room, the maid wrote 2 lines on a crumpled piece of paper she'd kept since her brave childhood. The resignation letter had been ready for months. That night, she folded it again and didn't hand it in, not out of fear, but out of justice. Leaving. There would be giving the lie the last word. She closed her eyes, repeated backward the numbers she'd taught the boy to dispel her fear, and felt, for the first time in days, that she was breathing on the right side of history. At dawn, the mansion smelled of newly changed flowers and ancient lies. The mistress brightened the smiles, lined up invitations, and spread her version like expensive perfume. The millionaire descended the stairs with the frown of someone who's already made up his mind. And halfway there, without anyone noticing, he raised his face to the discreet camera in the hallway. The little red light blinked as if confirming his presence. Fate, patient, was already settling into the front row. What had been planted in the shadows would begin to see the light, and the silent, unassuming weeping became breath for the change. Breakfast that morning began as always, the table laden with perfectly cut fruit, the smell of fresh bread wafting through the room, the newspaper, folded before the millionaire. But there was something different in the air. His eyes didn't scan the headlines, they remained trapped in the memories of the previous night. The images etched into his own mind gave him no rest. His wife acting out her shock at the bracelet, the security chief hesitating, the maid standing, voiceless, accused, and above all, his son rushing to her defense with the urgency of someone who knows where the truth lies. As he nibbled on the bread without tasting it, he noticed his wife repeating the story in front of one of her friends. Fortunately, everything worked out. I, of course, opted for discretion. The theatrical tone bothered him more than it should have. He looked up, and for a second stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. It wasn't just arrogance. There was calculation in every pause, in every word measured to transform a lie into a virtue. As he left for the office, he discreetly called the head of security. "I want the full reports from that night." The man stammered, tried to stall, but faced with his boss's rigidity, he relented. Hours and schedules were handed over in printed folders, and there were the gaps, unrecorded entrances, corridors unguarded for entire minutes, unjustified accesses. The millionaire ran his finger over the gaps like someone feeling cracks in a seemingly solid wall. The unease turned to certainty. Something was very wrong. The employer, noticing the movement, tightened the siege. She doubled her orders to the maid, forbade her from entering certain corridors, and assigned her exhausting tasks as if to crush her with exhaustion. At social gatherings, she intensified her version of the story, spreading the idea that she had prevented a greater scandal with her generosity. But the more she spoke, the more the millionaire realized the inconsistency. No generous person needs to repeat their own gesture so often. The boy, for his part, languished in silence. He refused the dish, left forgotten toys, and asked the waitress with the insistence of someone who couldn't lie. His father watched him and realized it wasn't a whim. It was the truth of a child who saw beyond the masks, and it ate at him inside. One night, he retreated to his office and opened his reports again. He traced imaginary lines, connected schedules, reviewed memories. Every detail formed a map that pointed in the same direction. His wife. The silence, which had once served as a shield, now felt like an accomplice. For the first time, he felt ashamed of himself for having remained silent. He called the security chief again and said in a tone that brooked no refusal, "I want to see the recordings, all of them, uncut." The man hesitated, his eyes lowered, his voice barely audible. "Some are missing." The millionaire needed no further proof. The emptiness spoke for itself. That night, he walked upstairs in silence, watching his wife preen in front of the mirror, practicing her smile for the next social event. He stood at the door looking at her as if she were a stranger, He said nothing, but a decision was brewing within him. The time for a mission was coming to an end. The mansion, so accustomed to polite secrecy, now breathed tension in every corner. Fate was moving forward, and the silent wheel of karma was already turning. The lie no longer had a place within the mansion. The mistress, with her talent for turning poison into perfume, took the rumor outside the iron gates, spreading it like someone sharing confidences. At charity brunches, at discreet dinners, at casual encounters at the club, she would whisper with false compassion, "A shame, but I had to protect our reputation." She didn't need to name names. The description was enough for everyone to understand who she was talking about. Within weeks, the town was repeating the story as if it were fact. The thieving maid, the generous employer who avoided calling the police, the scandal hushed up in the name of decency. At the market, the previously neutral glances were now filled with suspicion. On the bus, conversations fell silent as she boarded. Even the landlady of the boarding house where she lived began to address her with short sentences, suggesting she mind her conduct. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had turned to quicksand. The maid, despite her weight, didn't give in. She continued to perform her tasks with the same precision as always. Each folded towel was an act of resistance, each polished plate a silent way of saying she wouldn't be destroyed. But at night, in the small room of the boarding house, she wept silently. The tears fell, not only from the injustice, but from the feeling of being alone against a world that seemed determined to crush her. The millionaire began to feel the repercussions outside the home as well. A partner insinuated, in a malicious tone, that even in palaces there's a lack of control. A journalist sought statements about the incident. Longtime friends, previously solicitous, began to measure their words when speaking to him. It wasn't just the maid's reputation that was being ruined, it was the entire family's image. And this eroded something money couldn't buy: trust. The boy, unable to grasp the details, only perceived the emptiness. He kept the string medal he had given the maid in his pocket and held it like an anchor. He no longer smiled as before, refused to play games, and spent long minutes staring at the door waiting for her to appear. The mistress tried to fill the void with expensive gifts, but the child didn't want toys. He wanted presence, truth, affection, and the absence screamed louder than any speech. Deep down, the housekeeper was also suffering. She saw the injustice spreading like wildfire, but she knew that if she opened her mouth, she would be the next to burn. Still, she found ways to resist. A hidden note, a look of solidarity, a plate left in the maid's room with a short phrase, scrawled on a napkin, "Don't give up." These were small threads of hope sewn into the thick fabric of lies. The employer, for her part, believed she was safe. The more the rumors spread, the more untouchable she felt. In his mind, he had turned the narrative into a victory, but he didn't realize that the same venom he used against the maid was beginning to corrode his own image. Because when the truth is suppressed, it doesn't disappear, it just waits for the right time to resurface. And that hour was approaching. The millionaire, increasingly tormented by gaps and contradictions, knew he could not remain silent for much longer. The cameras, silent and patient, had recorded more than anyone imagined. And soon, when the images surfaced, the wheels of fate would turn against those who believed they were in control. The boy didn't understand accusations or reputations, but he did understand absences, and the maid's absence weighed on him like a grey sky that never cleared. Every morning he sat at the breakfast table picking at his bread half-heartedly and drew pictures on napkins, 3 figures holding hands, one of them always wearing an apron and a heart drawn on the pocket. When his mother saw it, she would rip off the paper and crumple it, feigning indifference. But his father silently tucked one of the drawings into his jacket pocket, as if that childish scribble were proof of something he couldn't ignore. At night, the boy would take the little plastic boat the maid had helped repair to bed. He would lie with it on his chest and whisper before falling asleep, "She said courage is remembering to breathe." He would repeat the phrase until sleep came, like someone reciting a prayer. The millionaire, passing by the room, heard these words once and felt a tightness he couldn't name. He raised his eyes to the ceiling, trying to suppress the discomfort, but his heart no longer obeyed the cold logic of business. One late afternoon brought the scene that most impacted him. He found his son standing in front of the pantry, the same place where the bracelet had been discovered. The boy held the string medal in his hand and placed it on the empty shelf. "To truly find a way," he said, and ran off. His father stood there, alone, staring at the simple gesture that had the power of a testimony. There was no escaping the questions echoing in his mind. What if it had all been a setup? What if his silence was the real mistake? The gapped reports remained on his desk, and memories of the party came back in uncomfortable flashes. His wife's forced smile, the perfect staging, the prepared speech. Every detail seemed too choreographed to be coincidence. For the first time, he realized the problem wasn't the maid. It was the farce unfolding within his own home. The housekeeper, sensing the growing storm, made a bold move. She left a transparent envelope with written times on the desk. Small scribbles highlighted the minutes when the pantry lights had come on. For no reason. Precisely during the interval when the mistress had disappeared from the living room, the millionaire ran his fingers over those pen marks and felt as if he were grasping the edge of a truth he had, until then, refused to face. The boy continued to be the mirror where lies had no place. One day he showed his father a new drawing, 3 people holding hands again, but this time in the pocket of his apron was a blue dot, the color of the sapphires in his bracelet. His father asked what it was, and the boy replied simply, "It's her glow because she's never stolen anything." The child's innocence was more accurate than any report. That night, the millionaire gathered all the papers, put the drawing away, and made a decision. He would call the security chief again, but this time he wouldn't ask. He would demand the full footage. Because if there was anything hidden, it was on those cameras. And if there was silence, it would be his, echoing with guilt. Doubt, once a nagging whisper, now roared within him. His son had lit a flame that would not be extinguished. The truth was near, and when it came out, it would not only clear the maid's name, it would also sweep away the masks of all who had bought into the lie. The mansion's security room had always seemed like a secondary space, with its blinking black and white screens and discreet red lights, but that morning it became the center of destiny. The millionaire entered without warning, his steps firm, his gaze sharp. The security chief hurriedly stood up, surprised by the unexpected visitor. "I want all the footage from the night of the party and the next morning," he said bluntly. The man hesitated, swallowing hard. He tried to talk about corrupted files, technical glitches, but his boss's tone left no room for evasion. No cuts, no excuses. The flash drive was delivered minutes later, as if it weighed tons. The millionaire took it to his office, closed the door, and took a deep breath before connecting the device to his computer. The images began to roll. First, the usual hallways, employees milling about, guests leaving, silence in the halls. But then the cuts came. On one of the cameras, the clock jumped from 6:45 p.m. to 6:53 p.m. 8 minutes disappeared as if time had frozen. He rewound, paused, fast-forwarded again. The same emptiness. Technical issues, he thought aloud, but his own tone was ironic. He knew it wasn't a glitch. It was manipulation. He continued watching, and another inconsistency emerged. At 11:58 p.m., the pantry camera recorded the light turning on by itself. A figure entered quickly, rummaging through the boxes. The face was invisible, but the body, the erect posture, the gesture of tying up her hair, nothing resembled the maid. Then came the detail that chilled his blood. The gloved hand held the bracelet, and at the juncture of her fingers gleamed a large, unmistakable ring, one he recognized better than any other piece of jewelry in the house. It was his wife's ring, the one she flaunted at every party. He paused the recording, brought the painting closer, and the stone's gleam reflected directly into his eyes. The silence in the office seemed to scream. His heart pounded, but his mind remained clear. The theater staged in the ballroom, the calculated speech, the speed with which his employer had found the hidden bracelet. It all fit together like pieces of a puzzle he had refused to put together. It wasn't just a lie, it was a coldly constructed farce. He leaned back in his chair, his face covered with his hands. His son was right, the housekeeper was right. The truth had been there all along, but he had chosen silence. Now, silence was complicit. He stood up, took a deep breath, and called the security chief again. "Prepare copies, all of them, and give me the original reports. No one else touches this without my order." The tone wasn't just a command, but a sentence. That night, he went down to the main room and walked through the empty dining room. Every corner seemed to carry the echo of the humiliation inflicted on the maid. He stopped before the long table, imagining her kneeling, cleaning up the wine his wife had deliberately spilled, and felt a knot in his stomach. This was where the lie had begun to take shape, and it would also be there that the truth would be revealed. The millionaire knew the next step would be the hardest, exposing the fraud in front of everyone, but there was no turning back. Karma had begun its dance, and the wheel was spinning too fast to be stopped. The next morning, the millionaire came downstairs, his face etched with a decision no one would dare question. He ordered all employees to stay away from the main hall and locked himself in his office with the flash drive in hand. The housekeeper, who pretended to be arranging books to disguise her curiosity, watched her boss with watchful eyes. He closed the door, plugged in the device, and let the images do the talking. The screen lit up the dark room. At first, banal scenes, staff clearing dishes, guests leaving the party, silent hallways. But then came the expected moment. At 11:58 p.m., the pantry camera captured the door opening. A female silhouette hurried in, carrying something in her hands. Her face was unclear, but her posture was unmistakable. It wasn't the maid. The millionaire leaned forward, his heart pounding like a drum. The figure calmly arranged boxes, took the bracelet out of the safe, and placed it among the supplies. When he raised his hand to turn off the light, the close-up captured the decisive detail, the immense ring glinting under the lamp. The same ring his wife had flaunted the night of the party, commented on by guests, and photographed as a rare piece. He paused the scene, enlarged the frame, and saw without a shadow of a doubt the symbol of his downfall. He leaned back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. The shame that consumed him was not only for his wife's lie, but for his own silence. He had let an innocent woman be destroyed in public while the real culprit orchestrated her own act. His son's words echoed in his mind. She never lied. He let the video play until the end, watching again his employer emerge from the pantry, as if she had just finished a secret spectacle. The clock read 12:03 a.m. Hours later, she would stage her great discovery in front of everyone. It was perfect proof that the maid's humiliation had been a planned spectacle. The millionaire took a deep breath and made a decision. It wasn't enough to keep the truth to himself. It needed to be exposed for all to see, just as the lie had been exposed. Because justice isn't served behind the scenes. It must be delivered in full view of those who witnessed the humiliation. He called the security chief. The man entered with his head down, aware of what was to come. "Is everything here?" the boss asked, pointing to the flash drive. The security guard nodded. "Shyly. Then prepare the room. Today everyone will see what these cameras saw." Meanwhile, in a simple room at the boarding house, the maid still wept silently, believing her life had been shattered forever. She prayed quietly for her name to be cleared, unaware that at that very moment the truth was already shining on the mansion's screens. The millionaire, standing at the window, surveyed the empty garden and felt a new weight. Not just the revelation, but the responsibility to correct his own omission. The entire house was about to witness the crumbling of a mask, and along with it, the rebirth of a dignity that should never have been harmed. The call for the meeting took everyone by surprise. Employees, advisors, and even some of the boss's close friends were summoned to the main hall under the guise of security adjustments. Word spread quickly. Something important was about to happen. The atmosphere held an almost palpable sense of anticipation, as if the marble walls themselves were also awaiting the revelation. The millionaire descended the stairs with firm steps, carrying in his hands the flash drive that seemed heavier than gold. His mistress, seated like a queen, wore a blue outfit she always wore when she wanted to convey seriousness. She greeted her guests with rehearsed gestures, certain that once again she would emerge victorious. Little did she know that the situation was about to turn against her. Once everyone was seated, the millionaire stood before the table and bluntly announced, "In recent days this house has been filled with accusations and humiliations. Today we will see the truth." Silence fell immediately. The mistress forced a smile, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her unease. The lights dimmed and the screen came on. The first images showed empty hallways, employees clearing away party leftovers, guests leaving. Then the camera clock struck 11:58 p.m. The entire room held its breath as they saw the female figure. Entering the pantry, the elegant posture, the confident gestures, the way she played with her hair, nothing resembled the young maid. And then came the fatal detail. The gloved hand placed the bracelet between the boxes and, as she adjusted her hair, revealed the gigantic ring glinting in the light. The mistress's friends looked at each other in shock. The security chief lowered his head. His wife, still struggling to support herself, murmured, "A montage. This is a montage." But her voice sounded weak, almost ridiculous given the clarity of the image. The millionaire paused the recording, focusing on the scene. His own wife planting the evidence. He said firmly, "The bracelet wasn't stolen. It was hidden. And the humiliation we witnessed was built on a lie." The room erupted in murmurs. Some guests recoiled in their chairs, others rose in silent indignation. The wife's friends, who had surrounded her minutes before, began to back away, as if mere contact would jeopardize their reputations. The mistress stood, trying to regain control. I did it for the good of the family," she shouted, but the boy sitting in a corner replied with the devastating simplicity of innocence. "Family doesn't lie, and she never did." Everyone looked at the door where the maid had been summoned by the housekeeper. She entered hesitantly, unsure why she had been brought. Her eyes welled up as she watched the scene on the screen, but she remained firm, without a word. The millionaire walked up to her, and in front of everyone placed in her hands the medal of courage that his son had kept. She was the one who showed us what is true. The boss, unable to hold her gaze, collapsed in her chair. The weight of her own lie now fell upon her shoulders, in front of the very people she had tried to impress. Her mask, built with years of vanity, was shattering into visible pieces. The entire hall understood, in that instant, that luxury no longer had any value. The young woman's dignity, so often ignored, was now the only thing that shone within that mansion. The truth didn't fade when the screen went dark. It continued to shine in the eyes of those watching. The room remained silent, as if even the chandeliers were breathing more quietly, so as not to disturb the moment. The mistress tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. The millionaire didn't need to raise his voice. The firm timbre of someone who had finally chosen a side was enough. He walked toward the young woman, stopped an arm's length away, and without a framed speech simply said, "I'm sorry." The word, so rare in that house, entered like light through a window that had always been closed. The maid didn't cry. She held her breath, as she had learned to do so many times, and nodded with a small gesture as big as her dignity itself. The wife's friends gathered their own certainties along with their bags, leaving in pairs with quick steps. The security chief approached the young woman guiltily and stammered an apology, which she accepted with a nod, not to absolve him but to release yet another burden she didn't deserve to carry. The housekeeper smiled with her eyes, as if witnessing a sunrise she'd waited years for. The boy then crossed the room and hung the string medal back around her neck. "Now everyone knows," he whispered, and the short sentence was the final sentence. Fate, which never forgets, took care of the rest with its precise irony. While trying to put her pride back, together, the wife snagged the ring on the lace tablecloth. The accusing bracelet slipped, bounced on the silver, and plunged into a champagne flute. The thin sound of metal against crystal echoed through the room like a sign of doom. No one touched the glass. The jewel, suspended in liquid gold, seemed like a truth drowned in its own excesses. From somewhere a waiter asked if he should remove it. The millionaire replied, "Leave it. Some things need to learn to sink on their own. There was no scandal, no scene. The mistress rose slowly, stumbling over her own shadow, and left through the back without an audience. The hall, once the realm of her laughter, now expelled her with the weight of what she had sown. Outside, the night greeted her not with a breeze, but with the coldness of doors that close silently when lies lose their usefulness. There, without the applause that kept her standing, she discovered how deep the silence that returns to those who have always spoken too loudly is. Inside, the millionaire did what he had never done before. He restored the name of the one who had lost it. He announced that all rumors would be formally denied, that the recording would be handed over to the insurer and the counselors, that lawsuits would be filed where appropriate. It wasn't charity, it was a delayed duty. Then he offered the young woman what seemed natural: double salary, a protected position, a request that she stay. She listened respectfully, clutched the medal between her fingers, and said calmly that she needed air that didn't smell of humiliation. She didn't refuse the settlement. She refused the golden captivity. The housekeeper, proud, accompanied her to the pantry, where her small purse rested. The big house would learn to miss her. In the garden, the boy ran to the edge of the pool with the plastic boat in his hands. His father followed, sat beside him, and for the first time in a long time, his watch was off. "Is she coming back, Dad?" The answer came. Without promises. "We don't chain the one who saved our house with new chains." He pushed the boat with the tip of his finger. The toy glided in small circles, and the boy smiled in that way the mansion had forgotten. Inside the living room, someone turned off half the lights. The remaining glow seemed sufficient. At the side exit, the young woman paused for a second before the gate. She looked back, not at the marble or the chandeliers, but at the people she had finally seen. The millionaire. Got halfway and didn't go any further. In that instant, she learned the difference between noticing and possessing. "Your name is yours," he repeated, and she took that phrase with her as proof. The driver opened the car that would take her back to the boarding house. Before getting in, the young woman took a napkin from her pocket where the child had drawn 3 figures holding hands and tucked it inside her chest, on the side where courage usually beats. In the following days, the city changed. Its tune, as cities do. But in discreet corridors, the rewritten rumor circulated. The maid who didn't bow, the master who arrived late, but arrived, the lady who lost the empire she'd built on the echo of her own voice. And in that house, as impossible as it seemed, things began to learn a different tune. The boy slept with the windows half open. The housekeeper laughed softly, and every now and then, someone turned off the hallway light, unafraid of the dark. A week later, the champagne flute still sat on the sideboard, the bracelet immersed as a memento and a warning. The millionaire asked that it not be touched until Friday dinner. That night, in front of a few people, he lifted the glass, tilted it over the sink, and let the liquid run. The bracelet fell into his hand, heavy and dull. He wrapped it in a simple cloth, placed it in an opaque box, and had it sealed. It did not return to the safe. It went to the archive where mistakes lie dormant and should govern no one anymore. And the young woman? She found work in a hotel that pays less than pride promises, but more than lies allow. In the hallways, respect walks without heels, and the smell of the lobby is indistinguishable from the perfume of contempt. Sometimes a guest's child calls her sweetheart, and she laughs inwardly. Some Sundays the boy and his father pass through the revolving door with a small boat in their pockets and no rehearsed words. Their eyes are enough. Time, which does not erase pain, knows how to transform it into a shore. And on that shore life begins again, clean, without spectacle, the exact size of what is true. If this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel right now. Here, each new video brings emotions, hidden truths, and twists that fate prepares to surprise. Your participation is what keeps this journey alive, so comment on what touched you most and come watch the next chapters in this series of stories that transform pain into strength and silence into justice.